Ah, here it was. The continuation of chapter 5, I believe. Go on, said Frodo faintly. It was the Sackville Bagginses that were his downfall, as you might expect. One day, a year before the party, I happened to be walking along the road when I saw Bilbo ahead. Suddenly, in the distance, the SBs appeared, coming towards us. Bilbo slowed down, and then, hey presto, he vanished. I was so startled that I hardly had the wits to hide myself in a more ordinary fashion, but I got through the hedge and walked along the field inside. I was peeping through the road after the SBs had passed, and was looking straight at Bilbo when he suddenly reappeared. I caught a glint of gold as he put something back in his trouser pocket. After that, I kept my eyes open. In fact, I confess that I spied. But you must admit that it was very intriguing, and I was only in my teens. I must be the only one in the Shire, besides you and Frodo, that has ever seen the old fellow's secret book. "You've read his book?" cried Frodo. "Good heavens above! Is nothing safe?" "Not too safe, I should say," said Merry. "But I've only had one rapid glance at, and that was difficult to get. He never left the book about. I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo?" "No. It was not a big bag end. He must have taken it away." "Well, as I was saying," Merry proceeded, "I kept my knowledge to myself till this spring when things got serious. Then we formed our conspiracy, and as we were serious too, and meant business, we have not been too scrupulous. You were not a very easy nut to crack, and Gandalf is worse. But if you want to be introduced to our chief investigator, I can produce him." "Where is he?" said Frodo, looking round as if he expected a masked and sinister figure to come out of a cupboard. "Step forward, Sam," said Merry, and Sam stood up with a face scarlet up to the ears. "Here's our collector of information. And he collected a lot, I can tell you, before he was finally caught. After which, I may say, he seemed to regard himself as on parole, and dried up." "Sam!" cried Frodo, feeling that amazement could go no further, and quite unable to decide whether he felt angry, amused, relieved, or merely foolish. "Yes, sir," said Sam. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I meant no wrong to you, Mr. Frodo, nor did Mr. Gandalf, for that matter. He has some sense, mind you, and when you said, 'Go alone,' he said, 'No, take someone as you can trust.'" "But it does not seem that I can trust anyone," said Frodo. Sam looked at him unhappily. "It all depends on what you want," put in Merry. "You can trust us to stick to you through thick and thin to the bitter end, and you can trust us to keep any secret of yours closer than you keep it yourself. But you cannot trust us to let you face trouble alone and go off without a word. We are your friends, Frodo. Anyway, there it is. We know what most of Gandalf has told you. We know a good deal about the ring. We are horribly afraid, but we are coming with you, or following you like hounds. And after all, sir," added Sam, "you did ought to take the elves' advice. Gilder said you should take them as was willing, and you can't deny it." "I don't deny it," said Frodo, looking at Sam, who was now grinning. "I don't deny it, but I'll never believe you are sleeping again, whether you snore or not. I shall kick you hard to make sure." "You are a set of deceitful scoundrels," he said, turning to the others. "But bless you," he laughed, getting up and waving his arms. "I give in. I will take Gilder's advice. If the danger were not so dark, I should dance for joy. Even so, I cannot help feeling happy, happy than I've felt for a long time. I had dreaded this evening. Good! That's settled. 3 cheers for Captain Frodo and company, they shouted, and they danced round him. Merry and Pippin began a song, which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. It was made on the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago, and went to the same tune. Alright, after saying this, farewell we call to hearth and hall, the wind may blow and rains may fall. We must away ere break of day, far over wood and mountain tall, to Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath this sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past. Our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we ride before the break of day. Very good, said Frodo. But in that case, there are a lot of things to do before we go to bed. Under a roof, for tonight, at any rate. Oh, that was poetry, said Pippin. Do you really mean to start before the break of day? I don't know, answered Frodo. I fear those black riders, and I am sure it is unsafe to stay in one place long, especially in a place to which it is known I was going. Also, Gilder advised me not to wait. But I should very much like to see Gandalf. I could see that even Gilder was disturbed when he heard that Gandalf had never appeared. It really depends on 2 things. How soon could the riders get to Bucklebury, and how soon could we get off? It will take a good deal of preparation. The answer to the second question, said Merry, is that we could get off in an hour. I've prepared practically everything. There are 5 ponies in the stable across the fields. Stores and tackle are all packed, except for a few extra clothes and the perishable food. It seems to have been a very efficient conspiracy, said Frodo. But what about the Black Riders? Would it be safe to wait one day for Gandalf? That all depends on what you think the riders would do, if they found you there, answered Merry. They could have reached here by now, of course, if they were not stopped at the North Gate, where the hedge runs down to the river bank, just this side of the bridge. The gate guards would not let them through by night, though they might break through. Even in the daylight they would try to keep them out, I think. At any rate, until they got a message through the master of the hall, for they would not like the look of the riders and would certainly be frightened by them. But of course, Buckland cannot resist a determined attack for long, and it is possible that in the morning even a black rider that rode up and asked for Mr. Baggins would be let through. It is pretty generally known that you are coming back to live at Crick Hollow. You might be able to hear the song or the music playing. It's sort of like this way, up, and this way. Yeah. Sorry about that. Not planned. But alas, it is what it is. It is what it is. Frodo sat for a while and thought. I've made up my mind, he said finally. I'm starting tomorrow, as soon as it is light, but I'm not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the North Gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge and the east road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We do not know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction. But that can only mean going into the old forest, said Fredegar, horrified. You can't be thinking of doing that. It is quite as dangerous as Black Riders. Oh shit. That's a paragraph. Give me a sec. Oh, whoops. That's not what I meant to do. I read the book in breaks between I scribbled down all the words that are translated. That is smart. Have you listened to the audiobooks? Yeah. I think so too. Yeah, you can definitely use like Audible. Audible, not sponsored by Audible, even though I wish I were. But no, without the E, R, without the R, without this letter. Audible, not Audibler. Yeah, I can recommend that nonetheless. You know, it is a good service for audiobooks. But yeah, that's smart. You were doing it really well, I think, of your learning of the English language, I must say. Keep it up, my dude, and you will get far. Not quite, said Mary. It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo is right. It is the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start. But you won't have any luck in the old forest, objected Fredegar. No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost. People don't go in there. Oh, yes, they do, said Mary. The Brandybucks go in, occasionally, when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once, long ago. I've been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet. Well, do as you think is best, said Fredegar. I am more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about the stories about it or night. Nope. The structure was weird then. Yeah, you must have. Audible is huge. I think it's Amazon's own company, if you will. It's a part of Amazon. So yeah. Assuredly. I am more afraid of the old forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare, but my vote hardly counts, as I am not going on the journey. Still, I am very glad that someone is stopping behind who can tell Gandalf what you have done when he turns up, as I am sure he will before long. Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford and Bridgefields, in fact, but he had never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up, as long as possible, the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crickhollow. He had even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove. "Excellent," said Frodo, when he understood the plan. "We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty is willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we have gone, that decides me. I'm going into the old forest first thing tomorrow." Well, that's that, said Pippin. On the whole, I would rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till Black Riders come. You wait till you are well inside the forest, said Fredegar. You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow. It's no good arguing about it anymore, said Merry. We have still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day. Can you hear the music? When at last he'd got to bed, Frodo could not sleep for some time. His legs ached. He was glad he was riding in the morning. Eventually he fell into a vague dream, in which he seemed to be looking out a high window over a dark sea of tangled trees. Down below, among the roots, there was the sound of creatures crawling and snuffling. He felt sure they would smell him out sooner or later. Then he heard a noise in the distance. At first he thought it was a great wind coming over the leaves of the forest. Then he knew that it was not leaves, but the sound of the sea far off. A sound he had never heard in waking life, though it had often troubled his dreams. Suddenly he found he was out in the open. There were no trees after all. He was on a dark heath, and there was a strange salt smell in the air. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower, standing alone on a high ridge. A great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea. He started to struggle up the ridge towards the tower, but suddenly a light came in the sky, and there was a noise of thunder. Okay, not gonna lie. The music's actually a little annoying. Yikes. Ba-da-da. Chapter 6. The Old Forest. Frodo woke suddenly. It was still dark in the room. Merry was standing there with a candle in one hand and banging on the door with another. "All right. What is it?" said Frodo, still shaken and bewildered. "What is it?" cried Merry. "It is time to get up. It is 4:30 and very foggy. Come on. Sam is already getting breakfast ready. Even Pippin is up. I'm just going to saddle the ponies and fetch the one that is to be the baggage carrier. Wake that sluggard Fatty. At least he must get up and see us off." Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bolger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. Merry went in front, leading a laden pony, and took his way along a path that went through a spinney behind the house, and then cut across several fields. The leaves of the trees were glistening, and every twig was dripping. The grass was grey with cold dew. Everything was still, and far away noises seemed near and dear. Fowls chattering in a yard, someone closing a door of a distant house. Yeah, I know. Trapes, I think that's like walking on a horse, just, you know, trotting along, kind of traipsing in a fancy way. Scuttle, is something I think you use when you're like on a boat, like you're scuttling along, or if you're just walking on a road, you're scuttling along. Swivel, I'm not quite sure. Swiveling is sort of like swaying, I think. But yeah. Yeah. Some of them I don't specifically know the translation of or like the meaning of. I know the gist of it. Like, you know, a tiny bit of the word. And so if used in a context of a sentence, you know, it becomes more descriptive in a way. So you understand what it means. But yeah, I get what you mean. Because I get that too sometimes. Especially reading Game of Thrones, which I read just before I go to bed. There's so many words that I don't recognize. But because, you know, the context, you get the context of a sentence and like the scene as a whole, it becomes easier to understand. Even if you don't know the word. At least for me, you know. It takes some time to get used to. But Game of Thrones is very like archaic. So using very old English, which, you know, that doesn't help. In their shed, they found the ponies. Sturdy little beast of the kind loved by hobbits. Not speedy, but good for a long day's work. They mounted, and soon they were riding off into the mist, which seemed to open reluctantly before them and close forbiddingly behind them. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and netted over with silver cobwebs. "How are you going to get through this?" asked Fredegar. "Follow me," said Merry, "and you will see." He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge, and went sloping gently down into the ground. It had walls of brick at the sides which rose steadily, until suddenly they arched over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge and came out of the hollow on the other side. Here Fatty Bulger halted. "Goodbye, Frodo," he said. "I wish you were not going to the forest. I only hope you will not need rescuing before the day is out. But good luck to you, today and every day." "If there are no worse things ahead than the old forest, I shall be lucky," said Frodo. "Tell Gandalf to hurry along the east road. We shall be looking back on it and going as fast as we can." "Goodbye," they cried, and rode down the slope and disappeared from Fredegar's sight into the tunnel. It was dark and damp. At the far end it was closed by a gate of thick-set iron bars. Merry got down and unlocked the gate, and when they had all passed through, he pushed it to again. It shut with a clang, and the lock clicked. The sound was ominous. "There," said Merry. "You have left the Shire, and are now outside, and on the edge of the old forest." "Are the stories about it true?" asked Pippin. "I don't know what stories you mean," Merry answered. "If you mean the old bogey stories Fatty's nurses used to tell him, about goblins and wolves and things of that sort, I should say no. At any rate, I don't believe them. But the forest is queer. Everything in it is very much more alive, more aware of what is going on, so to speak, than things are in the Shire. And the trees do not like strangers. They watch you. They are usually content merely to watch you as long as daylight lasts, and don't do much. Occasionally, the most unfriendly ones may drop a branch or stick a root out, or grasp at you with a long trailer. But at night, things can be most alarming, or so I'm told. I have only once or twice been in here after dark, and then only near the hedge. I thought all the trees were whispering to each other, passing news and plots along in an unintelligible language, and the branches swayed and groped without any wind. They do say the trees do actually move and can surround strangers and hem them in. In fact, long ago they attacked the hedge. They came and planted themselves right by it and leaned over it. But the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees, and made a great bonfire in the forest, and burned all the ground and the long strip east of the hedge. After that, the trees gave up the attack, but they became very unfriendly. There is still a wide, bare space not far inside where the bonfire was made. Yeah. Yeah, me too, Password. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. My first reading. It's good. So far. It's only the trees that are dangerous, asked Pippin. There are various queer things living deep in the forest, and on the far side, said Merry. Or at least I have heard so, but I have never seen any of them. But something makes paths. Whenever one comes inside, one finds open tracks, but they seem to shift and change from time to time in a queer fashion. Not far from this tunnel there is, or was for a long time, the beginning of quite a broad path leading to the bonfire glade, and then on more or less in our direction, east and a little north. That is the path I'm going to try and find. Ba 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 ba. Mm. Ba, 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 la, da, da. Give me a sec, just gotta... Lord of the Rings. The hobbits now left... Never mind. I was gonna make a joke. They're taking the hobbits to Isengard. There we go. It's out of the system. The hobbits now left the tunnel gate and rode across the wide hollow. On the far side was a faint path leading up on to the floor of the forest, 100 yards and more beyond the hedge, but had vanished as soon as it brought them under the trees. Looking back, they could see the dark line of the hedge through the stems of trees that are already thick about them. Looking ahead, they could see only tree trunks of innumerable sizes and shapes, straight or bent, twisted, leaning, squat or slender, smooth or gnarled and branched, and all the stems were green or grey, with moss and slimy, shaggy growths. Merry alone seemed fairly cheerful. "You had better lead on and find that path," Frodo said to him. "Don't let us lose one another, or forget which way the hedge lies." They picked a way among the trees, and the ponies plodded along, carefully avoiding the many writhing and interlacing roots. There was no undergrowth. The ground was rising steadily, and as they went forward, it seemed that the trees became taller, darker, and thicker. There was no sound except an occasional drip of moisture falling through the still leaves. For the moment, there was no whispering or movement among the branches, but they all got an uncomfortable feeling that they were being watched with disapproval, deepening to dislike and even enmity. The feeling steadily grew until they found themselves looking up quickly or glancing back over their shoulders as if they expected a sudden blow. There was not as yet any sign of a path, and the trees seemed constantly to bar their way. Pippin suddenly felt that he could not bear it any longer, and without warning let out a shout. "Oi, oi!" he cried. "I am not going to do anything. Just let me pass through, will you?" The others halted, startled, but the cry fell as if muffled by a heavy curtain. There was no echo or answer through the wood, though the wood seemed to become more crowded and more watchful than before. "I should not shout, if I were you," said Merry. "It does more harm than good." Frodo began to wonder if it were possible to find a way through, and if he had been right to make the others come into this abominable wood. Merry was looking from side to side and seemed already uncertain which way to go. Pippin noticed it. "It's not taking you long to lose us," he said. But at that moment, Merry gave a whistle of relief and pointed ahead. "Well, well," he said. "These trees do shift. There is the bonfire laid in front of us. Or I hope so. But the path to it seems to have moved away." Ba-da-da. The light grew clearer as they went forward. Suddenly they came out of the trees and found themselves in a wide, circular space. There was sky above them, blue and clear to their surprise, for down under the forest roof they had not been able to see the rising morning in the lifting of the mist. The sun was not, however, high enough yet to shine down into the clearing, though its light was on the treetops. "You do hear the music? What's up, Starline?" "Yeah, it's bad." "You had the strangest dream. Well, tell me. Tell me, Starline Forever. Share with us your strange dream." What's this? Watch this? Oh. Nothing. The leaves are all thicker and greener about the edges of the glade, enclosing it with an almost solid wall. No tree grew there, only rough grass and many tall plants, stalky and faded themlocks and wood parsley, fireweed seeding into fluffy ashes, and rampant nettles and thistles. A dreary place, but it seemed a charming and cheerful garden after the close forest. Did they enjoy themselves without you? Yeah, that usually happens. Not that I mind, really. But yes. The hobbits felt encouraged and looked up hopefully at the broadening daylight in the sky. At the far side of the glade, there was a break in the wall of trees, and a clear path beyond it. They could see it running on into the wood, wide in places and open above, though every now and again the trees drew in and overshadowed it with their dark boughs. Up this path they rode. They were still climbing gently, but they now went much quicker and with better heart, for it seemed to them that the forest had relented and was going to let them pass unhindered after all. But after a while the air began to get hot and stuffy. The trees drew close again on either side, and they could no longer see far ahead. Now, stronger than ever, they felt again the ill will of the wood pressing on them. So silent was it that the fall of their ponies' hooves, rustling on dead leaves and occasionally stumbling on hidden roots, seemed to thud in their ears. Frodo tried to sing a song to encourage them, but his voice sank to a murmur. Yes! Yeah, hey, look at that password. Thistle, yes. It's a sort of, evil weed, if you will. Exactly, a flower covered with spikes. Like a rosy thorn. Or a thorny rose, if you will. O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for though dark they stand, all woods there be must end at last, and see the open sun go past. The setting sun, the rising sun, the day's end, or the day begun, for east or west all woods must fail. Fail. Even as he said the word, his voice faded into silence. The air seemed heavy, and the making of words wearisome. Just behind them, a large branch fell from an old overhanging tree with a crash into the path. The tree seemed to close in before them. "They do not like it all that about ending and failing," said Mary. "I should not sing any more at present. Wait till we do get to the edge, and then we'll turn and give them a rousing chorus." He spoke cheerfully, and if he felt any great anxiety, he did not show it. The others did not answer. They were depressed. A heavy weight was settling steadily on Frodo's heart, and he regretted, now, with every step forward, that he had ever thought of challenging the menace of the trees. He was, indeed, just about to stop and propose going back, if that was still possible, when things took a new turn. The path stopped climbing and became, for a while, nearly level. The dark trees drew aside, and ahead they could see the path going almost straight forward. Before them, but some distance off, there stood a green hilltop, treeless, rising like a bald head out of the encircling wood. The path seemed to be making directly for it. How do you like my songs? Or my renditions of them? They now hurried forward again, delighted with the thought of climbing out for a while above the roof of the forest. "It's pretty nice. Hey, thank you." Now what I expected. I'm surprisingly delighted, yes. The path dipped, and then again began to climb upwards, leading them at last to the foot of the steep hillside. There it left the trees and faded into the turf. The wood stood all around the hill like thick hair that ended sharply in a circle round a shaven crown. The hobbits led their ponies up, winding round and round until they reached the top. There they stood and gazed about them. The air was gleaming and sunlit, but hazy, and they could not see to any great distance. Near at hand, the mist was now almost gone, though here and there it lay in hollows of the wood. And to the south of them, out of a deep fold cutting right across the forest, the fog still rose like steam or wisps of white smoke. "That," said Merry, pointing with his hand, "that is the line of the Withiwindle. It comes down out of the downs, and flows southwest through the midst of the forest to join the Brandywine below Haysend. We don't want to go that way. The Withiwindle Valley is said to be the queerest part of the whole wood, the center from which all the queerness comes, as it were." The others looked in the direction that Merry pointed out, but they could see but mists over the damp and deep-cut valley, and beyond it, the southern half of the forest faded from view. The sun on the hilltop was now getting hot. It must have been about 11 o'clock, but the autumn haze still prevented them from seeing much in the other directions. Wait, let me do this. Where was I? The sun on the hilltop was now getting hot. It must have been about 11 o'clock, but the autumn haze still prevented them from seeing much in other directions. In the west, they could not make out either the line of the hedge or the valley of the Brandywine beyond it. Northward, where they looked most hopefully, they could see nothing that might be the line of the great east road for which they were making. They were on an island in a sea of trees, and the horizon was veiled. On the southeastern side, the ground fell very steeply, as if the slopes of the hill were continued far down under the trees, like island shores that really are the sides of a mountain rising up out of deep waters. They sat on the green edge and looked out of the woods below them, while they ate their midday meal. As the sun rose and past noon, they glimpsed far off in the east the grey-green lines of the downs that lay beyond the old forest on that side. That cheered them greatly, for it was good to see a sight of anything beyond the wood's borders, though they did not mean to go that way, if they could help it. The Barrow Downs had as sinister a reputation in Hobbit legend as the forest itself. At length, they made up their minds to go on again. The path that had brought them to the hill reappeared on the northward side, but they had not followed it far before they became aware that it was bending steadily to the right. Soon, it began to descend rapidly, and they guessed that it must actually be heading towards the Withiwindle Valley, not at all the direction they wished to take. After some discussion, they decided to leave this misleading path and strike northward, for although they had not been able to see it from the hilltop, the road must lie that way, and it could not be many miles off. Also northward, and to the left of the path, the land seemed to be drier and more open, climbing up the slopes where the trees were thinner, and pines and firs replaced the oaks and ashes and other strange and nameless trees of the denser woods. Not sure if you can tell, but I'm trying to match my voice with the dramatic music playing in the background. Yes, this dramatic music is not fitting, but that was fun. If you can even hear the music. Ha ha ha. At first, their choice seemed to be good. They got along at a fair speed, though whenever they got a glimpse of the sun in an open glade, they seemed unaccountably to have veered eastwards. But after a time, the trees began to close in again, just where they'd appeared from a distance to be thinner and less tangled. Then, deep folds in the ground were discovered unexpectedly, like the ruts of great giant wheels, or wide moats and sunken roads long disused and choked with brambles. These lay usually right across their line of march, and could only be crossed by scrambling down and out again, which was troublesome and difficult with their ponies. Each time they climbed down, they found the hollow filled with thick bushes and matted undergrowth, which somehow would not yield to the left, but only gave way when they turned to the right. And they had to go some distance along the bottom before they could find a way up the further bank. Each time they clambered out, the trees seemed deeper and darker, and always to the left and upwards it was most difficult to find a way. And they were forced to the right and downwards. I love this music. Holy shit, this is good. I don't know if you can hear it. Perfect match. Thanks. After an hour or two, they had lost all clear sense of direction. Oh, they knew well enough that they had long ceased to go northward at all. They were being headed off, and were simply following a course chosen for them, eastwards and southwards, into the heart of the forest and not out of it. The afternoon was wearing away when they scrambled and stumbled into a fold that was wider and deeper than any they had yet met. It was so steep and overhung that it proved impossible to climb out of again, either forwards or backwards, without leaving their ponies and their baggage behind. All they could do was to follow the fold, downwards. The ground grew soft and in places boggy. Springs appeared in the banks, and soon they found themselves following a brook that trickled and babbled through a weedy bed. Then the ground began to fall rapidly, and the brook, growing strong and noisy, flowed and leaped swiftly downhill. They were in a deep, dim-lit gully, overarched by trees high above them. After stumbling along for some way along the stream, they came quite suddenly out of the gloom. As if through a gate, they saw the sunlight before them. Coming into the opening, they found that they had made their way down through a cleft in a high, steep bank, almost a cliff. At its feet was a wide space of grass and reeds, and in the distance could be glimpsed another bank, almost as steep. A golden afternoon of late sunshine lay warm and drowsy upon the hidden land between. In the midst of it there wound lazily a dark river of brown water, bordered with ancient willows, arched over with thousands of faded willow leaves. The air was thick with them, fluttering yellow from the branches, for there was a warm and gentle breeze flowing softly in the valley, and the reeds were rustling, and the willow boughs were creaking. Monkus. Well, now I have at least some notion of where we are, said Mary. We have come almost in the opposite direction to which we intended. This is the river Withywendel. I will go on and explore. He passed out into the sunshine and disappeared into the long grasses. After a while, he reappeared, and reported that there was fairly solid ground between the cliff foot and the river. In some places, firm turf went down to the water's edge. "What's more," he said, "there seems to be something like a footpath winding along on this side of the river. If we turn left and follow it, we shall be bound to come out on the east side of the forest eventually." "I dare say," said Pippin. "That is, if the track goes on so far, and does not simply lead us onto a bog and leave us there. Who made the track, do you suppose, and why? I'm sure it was not for our benefit. I'm getting very suspicious of this forest and everything in it, and I begin to believe all the stories about it. And have you any idea how far eastward we should have got to go?" "No," said Mary. "I haven't. I don't know in the least how far down in the Withywindle we are, or who could possibly come here often enough to make a path along it. But there is no other way out that I can see or think of." There being nothing else for it, they filed out, and Mary led them to the path that he had discovered. Everywhere the reeds and grasses were lush and tall, in places far above their heads. But once found, the path was easy to follow, as it turned and twisted, picking out the sounder ground among the bogs and pools. Here and there it passed over other rills, running down gullies into the Withywindle out of the higher forestlands, and at these points there were tree trunks or bundles of brushwood laid carefully across. "This music is ominous." The hobbits began to feel very hot. There were armies of flies of all kinds, buzzing round their ears, and the afternoon sun was burning on their backs. At last they came suddenly into a thin shade. Great grey branches reached across the path. Each step forward became more reluctant than the last. Sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up their legs, and falling softly out of the air upon their heads and eyes. Frodo felt his chin go down and his head nod. Just in front of him, Pippin fell forward onto his knees. Frodo halted. "It's no good," he heard Merry saying. "Can't go on another step without rest. Must have nap. It's cool under the willows. Less flies." Frodo did not like the sound of this. "Come on," he cried. "We can't have a nap yet. We must get clear of the forest first." But the others were too far gone to care. Beside them, Sam stood yawning and blinking stupidly. Suddenly, Frodo himself felt sleep overwhelming him. His head swam. There now seemed hardly a sound in the air. The flies had stopped buzzing. Only a gentle noise on the edge of hearing, a soft fluttering as of a song half-whispered, seemed to stir in the boughs above. He lifted his heavy eyes and saw, leaning over him, a huge willow tree, old and hoary. Enormous it looked, its sprawling branches going up like reaching arms with many long-fingered hands, its knotted and twisted trunk gaping in wide fissures that creaked faintly as the boughs moved. The leaves fluttering against the bright sky dazzled him, and he toppled over, lying where he fell upon the grass. Merry and Pippin dragged themselves forward and lay down with their backs to the willow trunk. Behind them, the great cracks gaped wide to receive them as the tree swayed and creaked. They looked up at the sky and yellow leaves moving softly against the light and singing. They shut their eyes, and then it seemed that they could almost hear words, cool words, saying something about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell and fell fast asleep at the foot of the great grey willow. Frodo lay for a while, fighting with the sleep that was overpowering him. Then, with an effort, he struggled to his feet again. He felt a compelling desire for cool water. "Wait for me, Sam," he stammered. "Must bathe feet a minute." Half in a dream, he wandered forward to the riverwood side of the tree, where great winding roots grew out into the stream, like gnarled dragonets straining down to drink. He straddled one of these, and paddled his hot feet in the cool brown water, and there he too suddenly fell asleep, with his back against the tree.